love you, Lord, we love you. Father, we give you all the glory. You are my rock, my strength, and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace, and my shield. You are my everything. You are worthy to be praised. You are my rock, my strength, and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace, and my.
All right, so this is the day the Lord has made. To rejoice and be glad in it. I'm so glad that we are right now live on the Seasoned Apologist program. It's a wonderful day to be with you, viewers, again. It's usually a very interesting program, and we'll be talking about a lot of topic on this same program. For the past 3 weeks now, today making it the fourth week, we've been talking about a very interesting topic of discussion. I call it very interesting. It's something that both the Christians and the Muslims should be very interested about, and it's actually about the historicity of Muhammad. Now, there's been a lot of debate among scholars at the point in time. We have some scholars saying, "Hey, does Jesus actually existed? Do we have historicity for the existence of Jesus Christ?" And at a point in time, the scholars discovered that yes, we have a lot of evidence to prove that Jesus Christ actually existed. But when you're talking about the historicity of Muhammad, it's something that a lot of Muslims have not really talked about. Even the Christians, they don't think about this because it's a passing to believe that Muhammad actually existed. They believe that Muhammad is actually an historical figure. But then by the time we begin to take a look at some certain features, especially if you've been with us on the show for the past 3 weeks now, you would have discovered that Dr. J had been exposing us to some certain things, especially as to the historicity of Muhammad. First off, he introduced us to the date, which is actually very important. He introduced us to the date. Then we looked over to the revisionists, both the old and the new. And then we looked at last week, Lord willing, we looked at the issue of Mecca, and we discovered that there is little evidence for the existence of Mecca. All right. But then today we're going to be looking at something very, very interesting, because Dr. J was actually going to be talking about this last week, but we ran out of time, and then we decided that we're going to be talking about this week. So this week, Dr. J is going to be talking to us about the Qibla, and I'm just excited about this. So instead of, because of our time, I wouldn't want to take much of our time. I want Dr. J to go right into this. So because of our time, I'm just going to bring in Dr. J into the show right now. Dr. J, how are you doing today?
Well, good. Thanks to have me back again.
Great. Now, Dr. J, we've been talking about this issue for about 3 weeks right now, and I find it very interesting because the audience are actually following beat by beat. You're taking us beat by beat. It's not something we do for a whole 3 hours, 4 hours, and you're giving us information one after the other. Now, what is the implication? Before you even get into this, some of the Muslim friends that I have on my Facebook were asking me, Korede, how could you turn about and begin to say now that Muhammad does not exist? I mean, if you actually say that, you actually making yourself look like a joke. If Muhammad does not exist, then what is all this you've been saying about Islam all the while? So if indeed Muhammad does not exist, then what is the essence of all of this, Dr. J?
Okay. Well, very simply, when a Muslim says this is a joke, you're making yourself look foolish, put it right back in their lap and say, all right, let's see who's foolish now. You say Muhammad did exist, right? As a Muslim.
Yeah.
Prove it right now. But don't prove it from the 9th century. Prove it from the 7th century. Remember, Muhammad didn't live in the 9th century. He didn't live in the 10th century. He lived in the 7th century. You tell me that. Your traditions tell me that. We call it the Standard Islamic Narrative, SIN. The Standard Islamic Narrative has always said Muhammad lived in the 7th century, that he was born in 570, that's the 6th century, and died in 632, that's the 7th century. So now you tell me where he exists. Show me one reference to him. That Muhammad that you're talking about lived from 570 to 632. Show me his name. Show me on a rock inscription. Show me on a coin. Show me on any manuscript from the 7th century. Otherwise, stop saying that I'm looking like a fool, because you now look like a fool if you claim that. That's all we're asking, because that's what you have to do. We've done that with Jesus. Remember, you many times for hundreds of years, they would say, did Jesus ever exist? And we said, yes, he did exist. How did we know? We went back to the 1st century. We went to writings like Thales and Phlegon, who were debating about his death in 52 AD. He died in 33 AD. That's 20 years after his death. We have a debate about his death. The day he died, what happened on the day he died, that the earth shook and the sun went dark. You can go to Tacitus. That's a Roman historian. These are not Christians. These are people that hated Christians. And Tacitus not only mentions that he died on the cross, he mentions it happened during the time of Pontius Pilate, during the ruling of Tiberius. So that's how we know it's from 33 AD. Josephus, a Jewish historian, writes about his death and that the Christians claim he rose again. Now that's extra biblical references from the 1st century about Jesus' death. So we're looking in the century that Jesus died, that he lived and died, and we're looking and we're getting artifacts that talk about him in the 1st century. Now you do the same thing, Muslims. That's all we're saying. Don't say that we're fools. Who's the fool now? Because you can only support someone living at a certain time, doing a certain thing, saying a certain amount of words in a certain place, by going to that place, by going to that century, and by finding reference to what he said and did. You cannot do that with Muhammad. So it's a perfectly legitimate question that we're asking. Did Muhammad exist? If you cannot prove it, Muslims, then you've got a problem, because that means everything you believe is pretty much washed away. And that means everything you believe is based on 9th and 10th century traditions redacted back to the 7th century, which means you're believing a lie.
Wow. Thanks for answering that question, Dr. J. And I believe that for the Muslims that are actually watching this now, they will be able to get a response and then an understanding of the reaction that they're having concerning this particular show.
Before you even leave this question, when a Muslim tries to respond to that, make sure that they respond by going to the 7th century. They're going to waste your time with all the reference, everything they've been taught, with all the reference from Al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud and Ibn Hisham and Al-Waqidi and Al-Tabari. They'll go through all these traditions that they have grown up with, and they'll say, of course, because Al-Tabari talks about it. Ibn Hisham gives us his biography. So there's Ibn Ishaq. So does we have Al-Bukhari, who talks about what he said. We just throw that all away. Said that is way too late. That's 200 to 300 years too late and hundreds of miles away. So don't waste our time anymore. We're fed up with Muslims always saying he did exist and quoting 9th and 10th century traditions, all written in Baghdad. That's hundreds of miles away. They never knew Muhammad. They never saw Muhammad. They didn't even live in the same century as Muhammad. Don't ever let them waste your time anymore. Say from the 7th century. 7th century. Prove it. Otherwise, you're wasting our time.
All right. Thank you very much for that response, Dr. J. I think with that said, you can actually take on the show and then begin to explain to us and begin to expand on the...
Let's do that. And let's go ahead and I'll share screen here and I'll go back to my PowerPoint where we stopped last time, because it's important that we do go back to this. It's important that we do continue to understand it, because it is this material that we're as you can see, we're trying to unpack for everybody that's watching. Now, what we have done so far up to date, let's just make sure that we review what's happened. We've already looked at the question that exists. And the question is very simple. And that is, everybody has believed one narrative. There's only been one narrative. There's only been one story, which all the Muslims keep repeating. And that is, Muhammad was born in 570. He started receiving the revelations of the Quran in 610. And for the next 22 years, until he died in 632, the Quran was revealed to him. And that's what we have in our hand today. He lived in Mecca up until 622. And then he moved up to Medina. He lived and all the different problems he had with his wives and with all the surrounding people. It's a great story. I've grown up with it. Yeah, Muslims have grown up with it. The whole world has grown up with it. But that's the only narrative we've ever had. Until suddenly, back in the 1800s, you had some scholars, some German scholars saying, hold on a minute. Wait a minute. Everything you're telling us about this man Muhammad comes from the 9th and 10th century. It's much, much too late. We've got a real problem. We looked at some of the great, some of the major players in that whole context, and we look, and you remember all the names. We went through some of the names. We talked about Ignar Goldziher and Theodore Noldeke and Arthur Jeffrey from Australia. The other two are from Germany. Joseph Schacht from Germany, and John Wansborough from the United States, and also Dr. Gerald Hunting, who I studied under, Dr. Patricia Corona, Dr. Andrew Rippin, Dr. Robert Hoyland. These are the ones who've gone ahead of us. They are the ones that asked the most pertinent question, and they were asking perfectly legitimate question, and that is, why is it that we have always listened to this narrative without ever questioning, can you prove it? That's all they're asking. 3 simple words. Is it true? Well, isn't that something we should all be responding to, whether we're talking about Jesus Christ, where we're talking about the Buddha, or where we're talking about Krishna, or whether we're talking about Charles Taze Russell, or whatever is our great leaders, even if we're talking about Abraham and Moses. Is it true that Abraham existed? Is it true that Moses existed? Is it true that he wrote the first 5 books of Moses? We have to prove that. We can't just sit there and base it on faith, because if faith is based on nothing, then it's no more, and then all it is faith with no belief. And that's why Muslims who have this faith in this man named Muhammad have to start showing us where this Muhammad was in the 7th century, because that's the century they tell us he lived. So show us one inscription, show us one coin, show us one piece of evidence I'm looking for, to prove that the Muhammad of the Islam, the Muhammad of the traditions, the Muhammad who supposedly received this book called the Quran, lived in that century. So far, they haven't. And that's why we've looked. I've been going back and I've been helping you. Remember, we looked at the maps. We looked at all the maps from the time of Ptolemy in the 2nd century. That predates Islam by a good, what we're talking about, 500 years. And Ptolemy did not have, in all of his descriptions of the Arabian Peninsula, there is no reference in any of those maps, in any of his description, for a place called Mecca. If you don't have Mecca, how could Muhammad be born there? How could Abraham have lived there, according to chapter 21 of the Quran? How could Adam and Eve have been thrown down to there, according to the Quran in chapter 7? Now, remember, Adam and Eve, I don't know of anybody that predates Adam and Eve. So that was the first man and woman. If they went to Mecca, that means it's the oldest inhabitant. It's the oldest hamlet or village in the history of mankind, because it's the first place that the first man and woman went to. So from the very beginning of time, Mecca should be there. It's not on any map until 900 AD, not BC, AD. That's 900 AD. Goodness, Muhammad supposedly died in 632 AD. So we're talking almost 250 years after Muhammad died. Finally, they get it on a map. Then we looked at the trade routes. Remember, we looked at the trade. We looked at first the land trade routes, which Muslims have always said all the trade went through Mecca. That's what made it great. And that was Montgomery Watt, who in the last century created the trade route theory. Well, Patricia Crone came and just destroyed that theory by showing that there is no document whatsoever that even mentions Mecca. We can't find any document from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, all the way up until the 8th century. And she reads and writes 15 languages. She went to all the documents, and she showed from all the documents there's no reference to Mecca. There is no trade that goes from Mecca. It all went up the Red Sea. However, she didn't go far enough. So we went to the Red Sea, and we saw that all the trade in the Red Sea went up by the African coast. None of it went through the Arabian coast. Why? Because there was no water there. If there's no water, there's no vegetation. If there's no vegetation, there are no trade. You cannot have people living in a place without water. You cannot have people and whole civilizations and whole armies and also enormous amount of history in a place that has no water. Without water, you don't live. Without water, there is no vegetation to feed you. And that's why nobody had bothered to look at the historical record. We did. And we just proved in March of this year, we showed that all the trade went up the African coast because that's where the water is. That's where the trade routes. We even looked at the trading cities. Remember, we talked about Assab from 246 BC. We can see references to it. We talked about Agilis from all the way from 79 AD. We saw reference to it. Those are both cities that on the Red Sea on the western coast. there in what is today Eritrea. We talk about Suakin, which is from 170 AD. That is in what is today Sudan. And then we talk about Bernissa from 275 BC, and we talk about Safaj from 282 BC. These are 5 different ports along the western coast, all in Eritrea or Sudan or Egypt. They all have been there since the 3rd century BC. All the trade was on the west. None of it was on the east. None of it went through Arabia. And the reason it was for Africa, because that's where the water was, that's where the vegetation was, that's where the ports were, that's where the people were living, and that's why there is no history for Mecca. It's on the wrong side of the Red Sea. And then we went to the references that people said, yes, this is proof that Mecca existed, and because we have references to it. And they try to talk about Agathargates. That's a hard word to try to repeat. Agathargates, who in the 2nd century BC referred to this great temple that all the Arabs went to. We found out that temple he's talking about is only 90 kilometers from the Tiran Island in the Gulf of Aqaba, which is the Wadi Ainuna. The Wadi Ainuna is 962 kilometers from Mecca.
Wow.
It's hundreds of miles away. This has nothing to do with Mecca. So then we went to Pliny's reference about this Dabanagiris, and we found that Pliny's Dabanagiris was on the eastern coast of Mecca, of Arabia. That's way over in the Persian Gulf. That's hundreds of miles away. Too far away. And then, of course, we went to Ptolemy's reference to Makaraba, and we shut down that reference to Makaraba. It turns out the Makaraba he's talking about is in Yemen. That is in the south. That's nowhere near. That is not Mecca. It's not even the same word. So we shut down those 3 theories. Now we're going into Dan Gibson's material. And what we're going to do today is looking at Dan Gibson's research. When you go to Dan Gibson's research, you need to ask, what about the Qiblas? Because the Qiblas is the direction of prayer. Every Muslim prays towards Mecca today, right? You know that.
That's true.
I know that. All the Muslims know that. Everybody listening knows you always pray towards Mecca. Why? Well, because according to chapter 2 of 145 to 150 in the Quran, it says that the representative of God, remember, it doesn't say Muhammad, it just says this prophet of God was told by Allah to take the direction of prayer from the farthest mosque, from the great mosque down to the Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram means to the place of bowing of forbidden place of bowing. The forbidden place of bowing. That means the Kaaba, they say. Well, okay, so it's the Kaaba. What does Kaaba mean? It means cube. What does cube mean? It means the Holy of Holies. Where do you think the Kaaba is? And where do you think the Kaaba was? Or where do you think the cube has always existed? The cube has always existed on Mount Moriah, which is the Holy of Holies, where the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem. That's why the word Kaaba, which means square, is the Holy of Holies that the Jews have been facing for hundreds of years, because they always faced Jerusalem. However, in the 7th century, the mosques that Dan Gibson found, now remember, he went to over 100 mosques. And he went physically to these mosques. And he found that all the mosques in the 7th century, are you hearing me, Korede?
I'm with you, Dr. J. I'm with you.
I just want to make sure that I don't lose you because your power goes out. So here you have, in the 7th century, all the mosques he looked like. And he is the first person in the history of mankind to go to these mosques. Why didn't people like David King, the world authority on the Qibla, why didn't David King go to any of these mosques? Well, because he stayed in libraries and he did all his work from 9th, 10th, and 11th century traditions. He did the very thing we're saying is the problem. And that's why Muslims had the same problem. David King did the same thing. He just went to libraries and he read what the people in the 9th, 10th, and 11th century thought was the difficulty. Because they saw these mosques were facing not Mecca. And they said, well, there must be a reason they're not facing Mecca. The reason why they said is because they're following the solstice line, or they're following the equinox, or they were following Roman roads, or they name it, you did it. They try to come up with excuse after excuse after excuse. They never went to look at the direction those Qiblas were facing. Dan Gibson did. He went to look, and he did. He used the Aster satellite, it's a Japanese satellite that's in space to follow the directions of every one of those Qiblas, which is what anybody anybody with any horse sense should have done. He used the best material that we have, or the best technology that we have today, like the Japanese have, And he used that technology to find the direction of all these Qiblas. And guess what he found? Every mosque that he could find in the 7th century up until 706, which is the beginning of the 8th century, 19 different mosques that he found. And he found them as far away as India. He found them down over in Jordan. He found them in Israel. He found them over in Syria. He found them way down in Yemen. And guess what? Every one of these mosques is facing Petra in Jordan. So let's look at the first Qibla, Petra in Jordan. Take a look at that map that I have there. Bibi Samarkand. Look at that. It's in the Samarkand. That's in Uzbekistan. Tariq Khana. That is in what is today Iran. Look at Anjar. Look at Khirbat and Minya. That is in Syria. Jerusalem and Jericho. That is in Israel. Amman and Mushta. That is in Jordan. Sana and Medina. Medina. Look at Medina. Even the Medina Mosque. The Medina Mosque in the middle of Arabia. The second most holy city. It's facing Petra. It's facing Petra. Boar and Sumnil. That is what is today Oman in Yemen. The Sherman Juma, that's way down in South India, thousands of miles away. Guangzhou in China, thousands of miles away, are all facing Petra up until 706 AD. And they continue to face there even up as late as 772 AD. So obviously, none of them were facing Mecca. The earliest ones, none of them faced Mecca. Then in 706, a new direction was created. And this he calls the between direction. Between what? Between Petra and Mecca. Why? Because the first one he found, the earliest way he found, is over in Wasit, which is in northern Iraq. Do you see it there on the map? Wasit? Wasit means between. Yeah. So it already described what it's doing. It's exactly between Petra and Mecca. But when you go to the point that all of these mosques in Haran and Raqqa, Hayr al-Sharqi and Hayr al-Kharbi, Damascus and Baalbek and Basra, all of these places, they're all facing a piece of sand. There's nothing there. There's no city, there's no town, there's no hamlet, there's no rock, there's no mountain, there's not even a rock. There's nothing that they're pointing. So obviously this is a political statement. This is a political statement, and that's why the very first one is called Wasit, because they're facing between Petra and Mecca, so that they're waiting to see who was going to win out. The Petra mosques were where all the Umayyads were facing, the Mecca mosque where the Abbasids started to face. And the Abbasids were not in ascendancy at the time that the Wasit Mosque in 706 was first created, and that's why these people were waiting to see who was going to win. Once they found out who was going to win this political war, then all their mosques would face whatever their sanctuary is. So that is called political expediency. Now, over in North, it wasn't until 727. Look at the date, Koredi. 727. Muhammad died in 632. So we're talking almost 100 years after the death of Muhammad, if there was ever a Muhammad. Almost 100 years later, the first mosque facing Mecca was discovered. That is in Banbor in what we know today as Pakistan. 727. Banbor. You see it there on the map.
That's a lot of time.
But they were very few. Even up until 749, the majority of the mosques were still facing Petra, and they began to start facing Mecca. It wasn't till after 749, when the Abbasids finally took control and destroyed and wiped out the Umayyads, that all the mosques started to face Mecca. But hold on a minute, there's still another direction, and this is known as the parallel. Why is it called parallel? Well, take a look at those lines on that map there, and look and see what way they're directed. They're all directed south, but there's nothing down there. All the mosques in North Africa and in what is today Spain, back then called Andalusia, all those mosques are facing south. And if you put a line between Petra and Mecca, those are the two sanctuaries, Petra being for the Umayyads, Mecca for the Abbasids. If you put a line between them, these mosques are facing parallel. This is called political expediency. Just like the Wasit mosques, just like the between mosques, these are showing and they're waiting to see who's going to win out. And that's why they refuse to give allegiance to either the Umayyads or the Abbasids. This is called political insight. And that's why it has to do with what was happening politically on the ground. Can you then understand why, when Dan Gibson came up with this theory, the Muslims did not know how to respond? Even David King did not know how to respond. He wrote a paper, a 54-page or 52-page paper that just used ad hominem. They yelled and screamed and hollered at David King because he didn't have a doctorate. He didn't study under David King. And David King is the world authority. How dare he question his authority? And yet David King only went to one mosque in his whole life. How can you be the authority on the Qibla and only go to one mosque?
Seriously.
This is the stupidity of in this case, European scholarship. And this is why Dan Gibson, who has no degree, but has lived amongst the Bedouin, who lived there for 25 years. He lived there, learned the languages, and he went from mosque to mosque to mosque, physically went there, and he studied everyone. That is what any good scholar should do. That is what any researcher should do. Not sit in libraries in London, spend all your time in London, in the British Library, and come up with your theories based on 9th, 10th, and 11th century theories. Those were just theories themselves, written by Muslims who already had an agenda to make sure that Mecca was the historical center of Islam and the historical center of the whole world. So David King shows that even if you have a doctorate, you can still be quite stupid. In this case, it shows his ignorance. No wonder he was angry. No wonder his whole paper is just full of ad hominem against Dan Gibson. But he couldn't prove Dan Gibson wrong. And that's why the mantle is still out there. Can anybody find fault with Dan Gibson's research? That's all we're saying. Don't ask whether he has a degree or not. Don't ask whether he spent all his time in libraries. Ask whether or not he is correct. Is it true? Always come back to that reference. Who is true here? Is Dan Gibson true, or is David King true? Is what Dan Gibson has found, if that is true, as I can see pretty well it is true, because he's the only one that has the historical evidence to support him, then I would suggest there is no Mecca at all until the 8th century. Now, let's look at these 4 Qiblas. Here you can see them. This is from Dan Gibson's book on the early Islamic Qiblas, which came out in 2017. I've got it right here. Let me just hold it up so you can see it. This is the book called Early Islamic Qiblas. You got to buy this book. All this material is straight out of this book, including those maps that I just showed you. They're all out of Dan Gibson's book. Please buy the book. It's very colorful. You can see it goes from mosque to mosque to mosque. It shows pictures of all of them. You can see it. He's done so much work on supporting his theory. Now, when you look at all the Qiblas, they were facing towards Petra until 706. There was confusion for the next 100 or so years as the Abbasids start coming into power. The first 17 mosques are facing Petra. The next 8 are in between. The next 10 are facing Mecca, and 6 of them are parallel. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876. That is the late 9th century, folks. That's 250 years too late. They should have been facing only one place. They should have been facing Mecca from 624 on. 624 was when the Qibla was canonized in the Quran in chapter 2, verse 149. That supposedly happened while Muhammad was still living in Mecca. Sorry, he had moved to Medina. 2 years after he moved to Medina, he received that revelation. I'm just quoting the standard Islamic narrative. That's what the standard Islamic narrative tells us, which means every mosque should be facing Mecca from 624 on. They don't begin to face Mecca until 727. That's 100 years too late. And they don't get finalized in all the mosques facing Mecca until 876. 250 years too late. Ooh, I love it. And it just makes my job so much easier. Now, what else are we going to look at? Let's look at the 5 stages in the Hajj. When every Muslim goes on the pilgrimage, he goes to the Hajj. Where does he go? He goes to Mecca, right?
That's true. That's true.
Now, any Muslim listening to me, correct me if I'm wrong. When you go on the Hajj, what's the first thing you do? You go to the Kaaba, right? The Kaaba, which is in Mecca. Take a look at that Kaaba, and you will see there is another Kaaba that's in Petra that is actually more accurate. It's the one you see in the upper left-hand picture there, that is circled in with a red rectangle. That is the Kaaba that's in Petra that fits the exact dimensions that you see in Atra, in the traditions that are written about it in the 9th century. Interestingly, that is just the ruins of the Kaaba. You only see now the floor plan because it's been ruined by an earthquake in the 7th century. What about Safa and Marwa? Remember, every Muslim that's listening knows that when they go to do the Hajj, they go and they run back and forth between these two mountains called Safa and Marwa. Mountains,
That's
right?
true.
Take a look and see what you find when you go to Mecca. They are not mountains, they're just rocks. They're only about 15 feet high. Children can play on them. That is not a mountain. How can Hagar go to two rocks looking for water? One rock over here? No, it says in the Bible and it says in the Quran and it says in the tradition, she went from one mountain, she couldn't find water. She went to another mountain. She couldn't find water. She goes back and forth 7 times, which is kind of odd. Once you go to the first mountain, you can't find water. Why would you come back a second and then a fourth and then a third time? Why would you do that 3 times when you can't find it the first time? Nonetheless, that's what the tradition says. You don't go to rocks that are just 15 feet high and not more than 20 feet long. Not to find water. You go to mountains to find water. Why? Because mountains are where the streams come from. That's where the water sources are. That's why you always go to mountains to find water. That does not exist in Mecca. It exists in Petra. There you can see the picture of the mountain. There's even a temple on it to commemorate that predates Islam by 300 years. What about the hill of Ararat where they pray? There's the hill of Ararat in Petra. What about the Jamarat where they throw all these stones? Remember, when you go to Mecca today, there's not one Jamarat, there are 3 Jamarats, 3 different pillars to throw stones out. And when you ask Muslims why they do that, because these are the 3 times that Abraham was tempted by the devil. So you're throwing stones symbolically at the devil. Hold on a minute. There was only one devil that tempted Abraham. And when you go to Petra, you can find there is the foundation for the Jamarat that's in Petra. That's the stone that they used to throw pebbles at. What's interesting is, prior to 1980 in Mecca, there was only one Jamarat. I don't know if you know this, Korede.
No, I don't.
Ask any Muslim that was there prior to, we're talking about just 40 years ago. So I was still alive when there used to be only one Jamarat. If you go there today, there are 3 Jamarats. Why did they add 2 more? Did suddenly the story change? Yes, the story has changed. Now if you go today, you will see that what they're now saying is that he was tempted by the devil 3 times. Well, was he not tempted by the devil 3 times in 1980 and prior to that? So suddenly even the narrative is changing in our lifetime. So if the narrative is changing while I'm alive, the narrative was created to begin with. It changes depending on the need. So why do they have three towers today? Because there are too many people. There is so many people. You can't have one tower because they were throwing stones on top of each other's head. They had to add another 2. So once they added another 2 to accommodate the huge crowds, they had to come up with a new story. So now they come up with 3 different temptings of the devil. This is what Islam does. It creates as it goes, and it's creating its traditions, it's creating its doctrines, even as we live. Then we get to the Zamzam well. There's the Zamzam well in Petra. That's the well that's in Petra that predates the one that's in Mecca. Isn't it interesting that no one wants to go and they won't allow us to go and find out how old that well is that's in Mecca? They refuse to let anybody get near it. If you look at it, it looks like it's a very new well. I would suggest that it's not any older than 1299 AD. Why do I say that? Well, Dan Gibson went to a conference a number of years ago where there were lots of Arab archaeologists. And he went and sat at their table in this conference. I think it was in Dubai. I can't remember exactly where it was, but somewhere in the Middle East. Now, remember, if you go and you look at Mecca today and look where the Hajj is, look where the Kaaba is, you will see a lot of skyscrapers being built all around it, cranes everywhere. And the 4th highest building in the world, the big clock tower, is now right there looking down over the Kaaba. So he went to this conference and he wanted to ask these Saudi Arabian archaeologists what they have found, because whenever you build skyscrapers as high as the one that they have there in Mecca, you have to build very deep foundations. Am I correct? Yeah. Even in Lagos, those tall towers, you need deep foundations, do you not? So when you dig down to build the foundations, you have your digging machines, the archaeologists show up, because the further you go down, the more you come across artifacts. The more you come across artifacts, the archaeologists want to find these artifacts, because that's how you recreate the history of the city, by looking at pottery shards or obelisks or stelas or tablets or murals or anything you can find in the ground. That's why all ancient cities, you can recreate their histories by digging into the ground and finding all these artifacts. So he asked them, what have you found there? And they kind of looked down at their feet. They didn't want to answer him. So he said, well, you must have found something, because these guys are digging way into the earth, the bowels of the earth, for these huge, tall skyscrapers. They said, oh, yes, we have found something. We have found an old Ottoman fort from 1299. That's 1299 AD. That is the 13th century AD. Can you see what that means? That is 500 years after Muhammad. They have found the first artifact, which means Mecca has no history. There's nothing there. They can't find anything prior to the 13th century. And all they could find was ruins from an old Ottoman fort. Oh, I love it. No wonder. It's so easy to destroy Mecca, just because you have to ask the right questions. Basically, what Dan Gibson was saying is it true? Is the history of Mecca true? Is there anything before the 13th century that proves that there was a place called Mecca, that there was a man called Muhammad, that there was a book called the Quran that existed that far south? And the answer now is proving to be no. None of it is true. And why? Because Mecca is a desert. Mecca, if it's a desert, it has no water. If it has no water, it has no vegetation. If it has no vegetation, no one lives there. If no one lives there, then there's no civilization, which means if there's no civilization, there's no history. And all we're asking are simple questions. Prove it. And we're answering it for them. Because we used to have a problem in the 1990s when I did my first debate on this, and when Jamal Badawi turned to me and says, you are only arguing from silence. Now, we're not arguing from silence. We're the ones that are finding the artifacts. We're the ones that are finding the coins and also the rock inscriptions. But let's now, before we finish this slide, let's look at that black stone. See that black stone there on the right? Correde, did you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
What is that black stone and where is it?
Well, the black stone is in Mecca today. the Muslims usually go there to, anytime they go for Hajj, you have them kissing the black stone. In fact, we see it on the TV, documentaries, everywhere.
Okay, where is it placed? Where is that black stone placed?
Well, you're talking about the one I'm seeing on the screen right now?
The one that you're looking at.
Okay, it's placed at the corner of the building.
On what building?
That's the Kaaba, yeah.
The Kaaba, the cube, the Holy of Holies. They are every Muslim around the world is praying towards that Kaaba, that square building. And on the eastern corner of that Kaaba is that black stone. You said that they kissed it.
Yeah, that's true.
Why do they kiss it?
Well, according to the standard Islamic narrative, SIN, it's there in the Sahih Bukhari that one of the followers of Muhammad, I think that should be Abu Bakr, if I'm not mistaken, he said he wouldn't have kissed the black stone if he did not see the Prophet of Islam kissing it. So it seems that they have seen the Prophet kissing it, and that's the reason why they're also kissing it as well.
And why are they kissing it?
Well, they are kissing.
They have to kiss it. Why did Abraham have to kiss it?
Well, there is no reason why Abraham should have kissed it.
Hold on a minute. Yes, there is. You don't kiss anything unless you get something in return, right?
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
You get something in return. What do they get in return? Forgiveness for sins.
Oh, that's true. That's also in the Hadith as well. Yeah, I think
every Muslim knows. That's why whenever you do the 7 times, they stand in long lines. They have to have police making sure that people get pushed away so that they don't stay too long, because there's so many thousands and thousands of people that want to kiss that black stone. They kiss that black stone
that's
to
true.
Forgive their sins. Now, who can forgive sins but God himself? Am I correct?
Yeah, that's true.
So how can God be one if a black stone also does the same function as God?
Oh my God, Dr. J, you're opening a can of worms now.
Exactly. Is this not called shirk?
Exactly.
Are they not committing shirk by having that black stone there? Are they not there for worshiping God? And are they not there for supplicating God? And are they now and basically elevating a stone to the same position as God? Am I correct?
That's true. That's true.
Why
That's
has no
true.
Muslim answered that question? And why is that stone still there today?
Hmm.
And if any Muslims listening, I want them to answer that question. The fact that that stone is there today. Now look at that black stone. Is that one stone? No,
Well,
it's
so what I'm seeing right here, it's a. I wouldn't even know if it's a stone, but then we have something like a hard substance in the middle, and then you have a silver substance that is covering it. Okay,
the silver is
so
only the frame. That's the frame to hold it.
yeah, yeah.
Not the frame. Don't look about the silver. Is the black part of stone? No, it is not. Most of what you're looking at is tar. There are 8 stones in there, very tiny pebbles. The largest piece of the stone is not any bigger than a quarter, a American quarter, a 25-cent piece. It's just as big as a little coin. These are
Hmm.
8 stones that have been broken up. That means there's a history. That means this stone goes back centuries and was destroyed and brought together with 8 pieces down to Mecca. We're going to do a whole series just on the black stone. I'm just kind of figure it. Wait till you find out what we now know about the black stone.
I can't
What
wait,
we
Dr.
know
J.
now is that wherever the black stone is, God's presence is there.
Hmm.
Wherever the black
Hmm.
stone is, God's presence is there. Woo,
That's interesting.
Now, Islam says that there is only one God, right?
That's true.
La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. There is only one God but God.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
how can a stone offer forgiveness of sins if there's only one God?
Wow, that's a very serious question, Dr. J. That's a very,
What
very
is
serious
it
question.
doing in Mecca, and what is it doing on that corner, and why are people kissing it, and why is it the Muslims haven't got rid of it? Because this is as idolatrous as you can get. This is worse than what we have in Hinduism, and we have nothing like this in Christianity. Thank God. And when the Muslims say that we are mushriks, I would suggest that the mushrikun, which is in chapter 9, verse 5, kill the mushrikun wherever ye find them, destroy them, lay in wait with them for every kind of ambush. Look in chapter 9, verse 5. That has to do with the Muslims that are kissing that stone.
Wow. All right. So, Dr. J, I know you're not done with this presentation, but a question is coming to my mind. Okay, so if we have this particular black stone, because I know in the Islamic tradition, I've read something that suggested that there was a particular point in time that this stone used to be white, but now that people kissed it, it turns black. All right, that the sin of the people is actually what turns it to be black. So the question I wanted to ask is, it is called the black stone. Has it always been the black stone? I mean, in
No,
the Islamic history,
no.
it's not always
But
been the black
you're
stone.
asking
So,
me to answer something that I refuse to answer right now because I have not yet done my videos on this. This
okay,
is
great.
coming. So we're jumping the gun.
All right.
Wait till I put up and publish my videos. I'm now putting together a whole series of videos just on the black stone. And then we're going to do a series of videos on the Zamzam well. And then we're going to do a series of videos on the imprint of Abraham, which is also right there. How can you have an
Wow.
imprint of Abraham, a Zamzam well that goes back to the time of Adam and Eve, and a black stone where God's presence is? Ooh, Basically, Mecca is as idolatrous a place and as pagan a place as you will ever find it. And yet Muslims have not been told the truth. So that's yet to come. That's all yet to come. But that's a whole different subject. We're still trying to figure out whether Mecca even existed. So I want to end today by looking at this page here. Let's do the conclusions concerning Mecca. When we look at Mecca, notice that Corona, Dr. Patricia Corona, could not find any maps with Mecca prior to 900 AD. Yet Mecca is where Adam and Eve went to. They were thrown to when they were thrown out of the Garden of Eden in chapter 7, verse 24 to 26. Remember, if they were thrown down to Mecca, that means it's the oldest city in the history of mankind. Why is it that we're not on any map at all? Any of the maps, including Ptolemy's map from the 2nd century. including Pliny's map. Why is it you cannot find any reference to Mecca until 900 AD on any maps? Secondly, remember that Montgomery Watt, who introduced the trade route theory in the last century, and that trade route theory, if you look at that, what you're looking at there, that's where the red with the X there going up through the Persian Gulf, that was where the trade used to go. But then the Sassanids were warring with the Byzantines. They had to redirect it, and they went down to Aden, and they went 1,250 miles straight up across the Western Plateau, up from starting in Aden, going up to Sana'a, then up to Najran, then to Taif, then down to Mecca, which is off the Western Plateau, 1,000 meters, back up 1,000 meters to get up to Yathrib, and then went up to Khaybar, then Tabuk, and then on up to Gaza in the north. That was the trade that all the Montgomery Watt suggested was how they redirected the trade after the Persian Gulf shut down. Now, Patricia Crone comes in 1987, and she debunks that completely by showing that, first of all, Mecca is off the trade route. Why would people come from Taif down to Mecca 1,000 meters to a place that has no water, has no vegetation, could not accommodate any caravans, and then go back up 1,000 meters to get up to Yathrib, then go up from there to Khaybar, Tabuk, and up to Gaza? That made no sense. So she shut that down, but then she said, well, let's go and see what we do know. And what she found out is that all the international trade did not go on the Western Plateau of Arabia at all. There is no reference on any of the trading documents from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, all the way up into the 8th century at all through Arabia. All the trade followed the green line. See the green line there that's on the map? It followed across the Arabian Sea over to around Aden to Agilis. See Agilis that's there? You can just barely see it, real small letters. That is in Eritrea. What is Eritrea today? That is the western coast. That is the African coast of the Red Sea. And from there, it went up to the Gulf of Aqaba. And from the Gulf of Aqaba, it went to what is today Elat, up over to Petra. And then from Petra, it spread out through 5 different directions to go all over what is today known as the Mediterranean world. Now, that she put in 1987. 5 months or 3 months ago, we even said we went one step further in her, because she didn't understand. She thought that the trade also could have gone to Jeddah, and then from Jeddah to Mecca, which is the port that's just about 45 minutes away from Mecca. We shut that down because of research that done by Dr. Gerald Haunting, and showing that Jeddah did not even exist until the 8th century. Basically, Jeddah was created to accommodate Mecca, but you have to have Mecca before you can have Jeddah. So it is actually created after Mecca. If you look over the next map, so look at the next map on the right. Jeddah is actually post-Mecca. Mecca was introduced around 741. Jeddah comes even later. It comes in the mid-8th century AD. There was no Jeddah because there was no water. If there's no water, there's no one's going to stop there. You're not going to have anybody stopping if there's no water or no food. That's the only reason you stop at ports, is to get water and food for your provisions. There was nothing to provide for them on the Arabian coast. Why? Because the whole Arabian coast in the middle section of Arabia is desert. And if it's desert, people stay away. Even people don't live there. So that whole trade route theory has now been debunked. Both the land route theory and the sea-based trade we've debunked in the last 5 months. Then we get to Dan Gibson's Qiblas. And you look at all the Qiblas, and every mosque up until 706 are looking and facing directly towards Petra, which is in Jordan today. That is 600 miles further north than Mecca. You've got the wrong place, you've got the wrong time, we got the wrong Qibla. And that's why he has been so devastating. And he says that there is nothing facing Mecca in any of these mosques until 727. And they don't really become standardized until 875, 250 years too late. Then we looked at the 5 stages of the Hajj, and that we just did today. And we looked at every one of those 5 stages of the Hajj actually fits Petra. What I'm going to be telling you in future broadcasts, I'm going to even go one step further. We have just now found, we're just coming across it in just the last month. Guess where those 5 stages predate even Petra? Where would you like to guess? Think of another city that we have now find every one of those 5 stages, and they're older than Petra, and they have been existing in this city for almost 1,000 years. What city do you think I'm talking about?
I can't even guess.
Try Jerusalem.
Jerusalem? Wow.
Jerusalem.
Of all places.
Everything that we find in the 5 stages of the Hajj actually predates Petra by almost 300 years and have been existing there almost for 1,000 years. We are now calling it the Jerusalem thesis. And I have four scholars that have been working for up to 20 years on this new material. If you go up on the Fander Films, we're just putting it up the last 2 weeks. It is amazing what we're finding. We can now find where the original Marwa, with the Mijal Safa is. We know where the original Kaaba is. We know where the cube is. And it's on Mount Moriah. We know where Gehenna is. It's in the Kidron Valley. It's all in Jerusalem. We pretty much know where all of the traditions, more than that, we know where much of the theology comes from. It's all coming from Judaism, and it's coming particularly from the city of Jerusalem. That's why when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, when the Jews had to flee Jerusalem, they had to go somewhere. Some went to Petra, recreated in Petra. The Umayyads then took over Petra. They were the ones that were living in Damascus. They used Petra as their sanctuary. When the Umayyads were destroyed and the Abbasids came and took over in 749, they redirected those stages, those 5 stages of the Hajj down to Mecca. And when they did down to Mecca, they chose the wrong city. They should have gone back up to Jerusalem where it originated. They went to Mecca, that has no history, that has no water, that has no vegetation, that has no civilization, that has nothing. And that's why we've just now found in the last 2 weeks, we've been looking at the wrong city. Wow. This is called the Jerusalem thesis. You're going to be hearing about it for years to come. We are now finding that almost every one of the major doctrines that we see in the Quran, even the Quran itself, look at the Quran. Look at the Arabic in the Quran. Even the Arabic in the Quran comes from Jordan, comes from Petra, comes from Nabatean Aramaic. And much of the Quran is basically is pilfering, is borrowing, is taking from Jewish apocryphal traditions written in what is today Jerusalem, and also Christian sectarian hymns. These are sectarian hymns. These are lectionaries that they would repeat in the worship services, and they're hymns that they would sing in the worship services. They have lifted them out and put them into Arabic, but the Arabic they put them into could not accommodate it, because the Arabic they were using was Nabatean Aramaic, which comes from Jordan, that did not have any dots.
I'm sorry, Dr. J.
You can pretty well say whatever you want. So they started saying whatever they wanted. By the 8th century, they started putting all the dots together. And when they put all the dots together, they started getting all the kira'ats. Now do you understand what
Dr. J, we're still going to have you back. I'm sorry about this. Power is about going off, so I quickly had to make sure that I put a stop to the program at the moment. But I really want to appreciate you, Dr. J. God bless you. Thanks for coming to the program. I hope we're still going to be having you on the program again, and so you can expand on some of the things that you're talking to us about. So, folks, this is how far we can go on the program today. But be rest assured, we're still going to be having Dr. J coming back to the program again, and we're going to be discussing more and more of these issues. I mean, there's so many things it needs to expand on. I mean, talking about the issue of the black stone, and then all of these things is unveiling is really very exciting. I know to some Muslim folks, this is crazy, but then at the end of the day, by the time you examine what some of these things that he's saying, you discover that is actually giving evidences, historical evidence to this, and I wanted to actually give it up to this as well. All right, so folks, this is how much we can take for now. We have to go now. Dr. J, really want to thank you. God bless you for coming on the show, and we hope that we're going to be having you some other time on the show so you can take us more on this. Thank you very much, Dr. J, and God bless you.
This is fun. We have a lot more to introduce you yet.
All right, bye.
Okay, over and out.
Yeah, bye.